Hey everybody, this week I want to take a look at the Flygon deck that I used to get second place in the weekly RS to PK tournament. So the main strategy behind the deck is that we take advantage of a wider range of attackers, types, and abilities to be able to choose the best Pokemon for the situation and just overwhelm the opponent using that advantage. The heart of the deck is going to be using Flygon from Hoenn Phantoms to attach an extra basic energy or Delta Rainbow energy to one of our Delta species Pokemon to help us accelerate our energy. So jumping into the deck here, we play 4 copies of Hoenn's Castform. Hoenn's Castform is going to let us draw a lot of cards at the start of the game. The ability to bounce an energy we have in play to attach it to one of our Pokemon to count as 2 rainbows also has a lot of synergy in the deck with Flygon allowing us to attach extra energy, and then just all the different energy types we take advantage of. So we play a 3-1-3-1 Flygon line. We only play 1 copy of Flygon EX because in a lot of situations we're going to want to set up the Hoenn's Phantom Flygon first, and it's really hard to get multiple Flygons out over the course of a game, and it's not always the best attacker in every matchup, so I went with just a single copy. So next up we play 2-2 Executor. Executor is just really good in general. Being a fighting type allows us to type match against a lot of the big decks in the format, like Shifter EX for example. Delta Circle hits for really decent damage for 2 colorless energy, and then Split Bomb gives us a spreading attack in the deck. Next up we play 1 Rayquaza EX. Rayquaza EX, Special Circuit, sniping for 50 damage or 30 damage is really good. If we're behind in prizes for a single Hoenn's Castform, we can hit for 70. And then it also gives the deck a lightning type to help with the type advantage. 1 Mew Fire, 1 Mew Water. I guess Hoenn Phantom's Mew, and then the Mew Star. Mainly, we just use them to be able to type match the opponent. Mew is really good against decks like Scizor or Meganium, while Mew Star, on the other hand, allows us to type match well against decks like Arcanine EX. The ability to copy any attack on our opponent's side of the board also gives us a lot of reach and a wider range of attacks that we can take advantage of. 1 Chimecho. The deck relies really heavily on being able to attach extra energy with Flygon or being able to grab the right energy for the right situation. Chimecho just gives us a lot of versatility, either being able to grab back a Delta Rainbow, Lightning, or a Psychic Energy. 1 Hoenn's Voltorb. I like to play Hoenn's Voltorb or Hoenn's Magnemite in a deck where I feel very confident I'm not going to be able to start with it. I like being able to grab that single attach energy off of a Hoenn Mentor. So with the deck playing 14 basics, I feel really confident that opening with a lone Voltorb is probably not going to be a very likely situation. And then lastly, we play a 101 Sceptile line. And this was one of the biggest things that sold me on the deck. Was I feel in the RS to PK format, it is very EX heavy, and people don't really do a whole lot to try to abuse that. And if you look at some of the decks that have won over the last few weeks, Chris Fulop won last week with a Speed Spread deck. A couple weeks before that, he actually won with an LBS deck. Speed Spread relying very heavily on Jolteon EX, while LBS relies very heavily on Blastoise EX. Bombtar does very well, relies very heavily on Electrode EX. And then even some of the turn 2 decks like Arcanine and Banette, Sceptile EX can do a lot to slow them down. So heading into this week, I knew I wanted to play a 101 Sceptile line in whatever deck I chose, just to see what kind of impact it would have on the format. Beyond the ability to shut off EX powers and giving them an extra energy to attack, it also has a really good attack on its own. Power Revenge does 60 damage plus 10 more for each prize card they've taken. So later on in the game, for 3 energy, you can be hitting for easily 80, 90, 100 damage. It also gives the deck another psychic attacker beyond just the Flygon EX. Moving into the trainer lineup here, we rely on the Hoenn engine, playing 4 Transceiver, 2 Mentor, 2 Researcher, and then 2 Adventurer. The 2 Researcher and 2 Adventurer, usually you'll see just 1 and 1 on those. I bumped them up to 2 copies each for a couple of different reasons. One, the entire deck is basically Delta Species Pokemon. So Hoenn Researcher is going to be able to grab you any Pokemon you want, most likely outside of Voltorb and the Castform. Next up, the Adventurer. since the entire deck is Delta Species Pokemon, it's very easy to discard a Delta Species Pokemon and draw 4 cards. There's also a lot of synergy being able to play a Holon supporter with Chimecho. So the ability to basically draw 4 cards, I figured was pretty much on par with Steven's advice in a lot of matchups, and then the ability to use a Chimecho after that just pushed the extra copy of Adventure over the top for me. Next up, 1 Holon Scientist, and then 4 Rockets Admin. I honestly think 4 Rockets Admin should be staple in about every single deck in the format. This deck in particular, I like that you rely heavily on countering the opponent, so if they send a big threat up, you can knock it out, and you can proceed that with the Rockets Admin. Ideally, just trying to put them in a really, really difficult spot. 4 Rare Candy, make sure we get an early Flygon, or to get Skeptile X out in matchups, we need to get it out. 3 Windstorm. The deck, one of the things I did not like about the deck is it basically got hurt by every counter stadium in the game, and then Cessation Crystals. So Cessation Crystal just shuts off most of the stuff in your deck here, especially the Flygon, which you rely very heavily on. And then the deck is also very weak to both Cursed Stone, Windstorm, and Crystal Beach. So, I'm sorry, not Windstorm, Desert Ruins. So I played 3 copies of Windstorm just to make sure that I'd be able to have counters when possible. Sometimes you can play around a Cessation Crystal. You can just force your way through it or fight through it. Well, and going along with that, I also play 2 copies of Warp Point. Warp Point gives you a little bit of an out with Cessation Crystal also. I also have seen a lot of Mulock decks over the last couple of weeks, so I wanted that extra copy of Warp Point. I think that matchup is really winnable, but you've got to have some switching cards in your deck to be able to pull it out. Warp Point also, and I've talked about this in other videos, Warp Point does a really good job at also just getting you free, easy prizes, and gives you the ability to close a game out. 2 Pokemon Retriever. The deck relies very heavily on being able to choose the right Pokemon for the right deck. So let's say, for example, we're playing against a Scizor EX deck. We might, 1 copy of Mew is not going to get us there. We're going to need 2 or 3 copies. We might need to get a Flygon EX back, Skeptile EX, just whatever the current matchup needs, and whatever type we need to throw against the opponent. The Pokemon Retriever just makes sure we have it. That finishes up the trainer lineup. Moving on to the energy lineup here, I play 4 Delta Rainbow. Everything in the deck is Delta. Free Rainbow Energy. 3 Lightning Energy. And then 3 Psychic Energy. I just split the Psychic Energy and the Lightning Energy down the middle. There's different Pokemon in the deck that need the Lightning, different Pokemon in the deck that need the Psychic. And I felt playing 3 copies of each meant I would probably see one of them relatively early in the matchup, get it into the discard pile, and then I can get it back with Chimecho whenever I need it. Lastly, we play 1 Metal Energy. I played a single copy of Metal Energy just because you can search it out with Holon Researcher, and situations with Flygon actually come up a decent amount where you can put it on Flygon to get the -10. Matchups like spread decks, for example, being able to stop your Flygon from taking as much damage is actually really, really useful, and it can mess with the opponent's math an awful lot. Alright, so that pretty much wraps up the deck profile here. Let's go ahead and jump into, I want to share my matches from the tournament, and then kind of give a little bit more of a breakdown from that. So to give a quick breakdown of the tournament, it was a 16-person tournament, double elimination. As for my deck, it played all right. I felt like it was one of the more inconsistent decks that I've played. In matchups, every matchup I went into, I felt like I could win that matchup. But I felt like me winning or losing depended really heavily on how I opened, how the opponent opened, and then how I was able to draw over the course of the game. In any format where decks are typically playing 4 Rockets Admin, it's really, if you're playing a more inconsistent deck, it's really easy where, it's a lot easier where you can miss a step somewhere over the course of the game, and even if you're in a very dominant position, you could end up losing if you're just not able to draw well off of a late game admin. So, I'll talk about it a little bit in the next section, but I think to do it over again, I would have put a little bit more emphasis on playing a little bit more consistent of a list. So for round one, I didn't really get to see a whole lot of my opponent's deck. He opened with a Rayquaza EX and missed the turn 1 energy drop. I opened with a Pop 5 Mew, and I had Trapinch, Rare Candy, Flygon, and Holen's Cast Form. So I was able on turn 1 to get the Holen's Cast Form under the Mew, use the attack to grab 2 extra energy from my deck. So on my first turn of the game, I had a Pop 5 Mew with 4 energies under it to my opponent's 0 energies. I basically was able to ride that Mew for the early game, hitting him on my second turn for 70 damage, and then I transitioned into a Flygon EX and won the game as my opponent was just really struggling to set up. Round 2, I played against a Shifter EX deck. I was able to hit a really early Executor, and there was not a whole lot my opponent could do about it. The matchup itself, I think, is a little bit trickier because your deck relies very heavily on powers. So if they're able to get multiple Shiftries into play, it can be really hard to use Flygon or to use Chimento, and they can pick up easy prizes that way, and then maybe over the course of the game they only have to take 3 or 4 normal prizes or fair prizes, and then they'll cheat out 1 or 2 prizes just through the Shifter EX's body. But I was able to hit an early Executor and just basically run through my opponent. Round 3 was Scizor EX. Thankfully, I did not prize my Pop 5 Mew. I was able to use it to counter his Scizor EX, and essentially I was making 2-for-1 trades. I struggled a little bit to set up this game, so it was actually really close, but thanks to Mew and I think 1 or 2 Pokemon Retrievers, I was just able to cycle through that Mew several times and win the game. Round 4, I played against Bombtar. This was Graham's deck. He played the matchup really well. I got a little bit slower of a start this game. I was not able to get my Sceptile EX out, and he was able to get his Electrode off and then start doing just abusing things like POW hand extension, and my deck can be very weak to spread. He was playing Fire Energy and the Hole in FF to get rid of the weakness. He was not able to get that out early, but I was not able to find an early Executor, so he basically just spread for the win. Round 5, I dropped down to the loser's bracket. I played against the Shifter EX. It was the same person from round 2, and I basically had the same thing. I just get this insane opening, get a really early Executor. I set up a second Executor on the bench, and with Shiftry being weak to fighting, there just wasn't much he could do. If Shiftry's able to get multiple Shiftries out early and really start sniping or snipe down the Executor before you're able to really attack with it, it can be a pretty big issue for your deck. But I was able to get the early Executor, and then I was also able to get a Split Bomb off to put additional damage on that Shiftry to set up the one-hit knockout for the second Executor if I needed to. And then in the finals, I played against Bombtar again. This was Graham once again. He played the matchup incredibly well. I, once again, just got a little bit slower of a start and was just not able to keep up with him. He was able to spread for the win. I don't think the Bombtar matchup is that bad of a matchup. I think it's a highly winnable matchup. I knew going into it there was a couple of factors. The first one would be is if I was able to get an early Sceptile EX. Neither game I was. And then second of all, it was coming down to that Executor. Could I get an Executor active and start running through Tyranitar's? And then from Graham's side, could Graham find his Fire Energy and Hole in FF? And it was whoever did a better job of that was going to win those games. And both times I played against Graham, I got a little bit, I would say a subpar start. Graham got pretty decent starts both games. They were nothing crazy, but just in general, his deck was a little bit more consistent. And I think this is really something with deck building, and I want to talk about really quick here. So one of my goals with this channel is I always want to approach things in a very positive manner and in a very positive way. But I also want this channel to be something where if you come in and you watch these videos, I want you to feel like you learned something or you grew as a player. And one of the things from this tournament for me was round 1, my opponent did not get a very good opening. and I was able to get a very quick win off. And after the game, he made the comment, well, you didn't beat me, my deck beat me. And I think that's frustrating. I hate when people take that away from a game. Because I think regardless if you win a game or you lose a game, you should look at it and say, what could I have done differently? What could I have changed? Was there something I could have played differently? Was there something I could have done differently in the deck building process? Was there just anything I could do differently? And sometimes the answer is no. Or sometimes you're taking a certain level of a calculated risk and it's not paying off for you. But if you leave a game and you're just like, he just got lucky, then I don't feel like you ever learn anything from that game. And to take this into the 2 games against Graham, I don't ever want to, I'm not going to take anything away from Graham. Graham played it incredibly well. He had basically a perfect bomb tar list. He played the matchup incredibly well. And I think the matchup is a toss-up. I think it's a matchup I can win. I think it's a matchup he can win. But from both of those, I played a deck this week that had some consistency issues. And one of the biggest selling points for me in playing this deck was being able to come in and play a Skeptile EX, but adding that Skeptile EX and then playing a very diverse trainer lineup, a very diverse Pokemon lineup, you see a lot of ones across both of those, it gave the deck some consistency problems. So when I'm playing against Graham, and Graham has a very focused deck, a very focused strategy, a very focused list, and I have a more inconsistent deck with a less focused list, and it comes down to who can get their strategy off for this matchup better. Graham was able to get it off more consistently because he played a more consistent list. Now, I think if I take that and I'm just like, Graham got lucky. I had a chance to, it was a 50-50 matchup. Graham just got lucky. I don't learn anything from that. I don't take anything away from that that's going to make me a better player. And if I can go into this matchup and say, okay, or step away from this game and say, okay, look, I lost 2 games to Graham. It was a matchup that I can win, but, Graham knew what he had to do. I knew what I had to do. Graham was just able to get his deck off more consistently than I was able to get mine off. Then, is there something I could have done differently in the deck building process? I learned a lot from this tournament. And to do it over again or to go into another tournament, to playing Flygon, I would play a much more consistent list. And even though Skeptile EX was one of the biggest selling points for me in playing Flygon to begin with, it was just so hard to get it out consistently in the matchups that you need it in that I probably would not play Skeptile EX in the deck. I would probably drop it for 2 Steven's advice. I would probably make sure that I had that 3rd mentor. Just stuff that's going to help me more consistently set up so when I go into these matchups and it's a toss-up matchup like I feel Bombtar is, then I'm going to be more able to get my strategy off. And if I would just leave that game and say, no, Graham just got lucky, that's all there is to it, and I didn't really analyze if there's anything I could do better or anything I could change, then I'm not really growing as a player. And the next time that I went into a tournament with this deck and I lose again to Graham, well, he just got lucky again. And that cycle is just going to repeat itself until you can get in that mindset. And on the other side of that, though, I feel like sometimes players will overanalyze stuff. Just, if you lose a game, take a couple of minutes, think about it, what could I have done differently, and then move forward. And I guess that's all I want to say on that. Overall, it was a great tournament. I'm really glad I played Flygon. I'm glad I got to take it as far in the tournament as I did. Flygon has not won one of these tournaments yet. I was really hoping to be the first, but came up a little bit shy this week. But I also feel like I learned a lot about the deck and about the matchups. And if I decide to play the deck again, I'm gonna feel pretty confident in my choice on it.